Good morning, and thank you very much for joining us. I apologize for the delay in getting started, but we wanted to make sure that the link to watch this webcast live was up on the HUD website. So it is, and for those of you who have been waiting patiently, thank you so much, and welcome. I'm excited to share this information with you today about the Ross FY16 Notice of Funding Availability. The CFDA number, the Catalog of Federal Domestic Assistance number, is 14.870, and you'll see why this is important later. But let's get started. We have a lot to cover today. I'll be covering the program structure, requirements for applying, and deadline date, things like that. So let's get started. So what's the purpose of the Ross program? At its core, Ross creates linkages and referrals to local public and private sector providers to enable participating families to increase their earned income, make progress towards achieving economic independence and housing self-sufficiency, and in the case of elderly or disabled residents, to help them improve living conditions and enable them to age in place, live and age in place, which can actually be a very big savings for local governments and even federal governments. I've heard many, many wonderful stories about what Ross-funded service coordinators do in their communities, and so I'm always very gratified to hear those stories. So please feel free actually to share them with me, and so I can share them with others. So I issue this request every single year to please read the NOFA and the general section very carefully. So we do these webinars as a courtesy, but your real guide, your Bible for the purposes of applying to the Ross program is the NOFA, the Notice of Funding Availability. And you can obtain both of these from Grants.gov or this link, which is a HUD link. It's the Ross funding page. So I will post these slides on this page as well, so you'll be able to refer to these slides later. So I want to also talk about SAM, registration with SAM. This is really important. Every year somebody misses this, and at the last minute they find out that they're not able to submit their application on Grants.gov. Your SAM registration expires every single year, so check now whether it's up to date. Your Grants.gov registration, if there's anybody that's changed in your organization who submits the application, that would be the authorized organizational representative. Make sure they're registered appropriately as well. I would also ask that you go to the links that I'm sharing with you today and spend some time reviewing the tutorials that are provided by Grants.gov on how to register. There's really good information there, and the tutorials are a few minutes long each, so it doesn't take up that much time. Also, you can go to Grants.gov for more useful information. HUD.gov/grants for more useful information, and we do a good job of updating any news or information that's relevant to applying. So for example, there was an issue with Adobe recently, Adobe compatibility, so please go there to make sure your Adobe is compatible with Grants.gov before you submit. If you have any type of problem with Grants.gov, please call this number. The folks there are really helpful, very knowledgeable. The program office, really, we don't have anything to do with Grants.gov, so try not to call us for Grants.gov issues. And like I said, they're very, very helpful at Grants.gov, so feel free to call them. So let's turn now to the due date. It's due May 16th by a second before midnight Eastern Time. If you've already submitted, it's true the NOFA was published March 31st. There's no need to resubmit. Applications must be received and validated by the deadline date and time. We really recommend that you submit your application 48 hours before the deadline, because it can take 24 to 48 hours to actually get it validated. And if there is some sort of a problem that needs to be fixed, if your application gets rejected, you'll only have a 24-hour grace period. And in some cases, those 24 hours are not enough to correct the problem that you might have. So please try to get your application in as soon as you can. So this year we have $35 million available. We're not setting aside any money this year for Jobs Plus like we have in past years. So the eligible applicants remain the same: public housing authorities, tribes, TDHEs, resident associations this year, well, as in last year and 2014 as well, resident associations have to be 501c3s or locally incorporated nonprofit organizations. 501c3 organizations that are not resident associations, like a Goodwill, are also eligible to apply, but they have to show support from a resident association, a PHA, or a tribe. So 25% of all of our funding is reserved by statute. Congress said that we had to set aside 25% of our funding for qualified and eligible resident associations. The grant will pay for the salaries of service coordinators, but not for the provision of services. The grant will also pay for administrative costs and the training of the Ross service coordinator, and I'll get into this more later. So these are our funding priorities. We have the resident associations that are part of that 25 set aside, and we include the new applicants and renewals, and I'll talk more about those as well. Renewal applicants, all other renewal applicants, and then new applicants. We select qualified applicants through a lottery, and it's basically structured like this: 1 for resident associations, 2 for renewals, and 3 for new applicants. And I'll talk more about the structure of the lottery later as well. So here are the renewal applicants this year. They are grantees who received funding in fiscal year 2013 funds. You'll know if you're a 2013 grantee by the last 2 numbers in your grant number, your HUD-issued grant number. So the last 2 digits would be a 13. If you have questions, you can also see the previously funded development report, which is in the instructions download from Grants.gov, and I'll talk more about that as well. But it's also available on our HUD website, which I've listed up on this slide. New applicants are either folks who've never received Ross funding in the past or were funded a Ross grant but have no money remaining. So these would be people with grants from 2012 or before with no money remaining. So I alluded to this a little bit earlier. So all resident association applicants must have 501c3 status or locally incorporated nonprofit status. And this is big because if you don't have it at the time of award, you're just not considered eligible. As in past years, you have to submit evidence of nonprofit status with your application and either your IRS annual return, or if you're a locally incorporated nonprofit, the equivalent of your tax report to the state. So we want both of those, and this latter one is new this year, so the tax information is new. I also want to point out, and I'll say this probably several times during this broadcast, if resident associations want to be included in the 25% set aside, they may only submit 1 application for 1 service coordinator position. So this year, like last year, but this will be new for renewals, we have only 3 program thresholds. They're still substantial, but they are match, demonstrated link between partners and local need, and we'll talk in detail about this, and letters of support for nonprofit applicants. I've put in parentheses the pages in the NOFA where you can read more about this. Past performance and the capacity of applicant used to be threshold, but now they are program requirements. There are no policy priorities anymore. Those were included in the logic model. And the NOFA does include a description of the minimum qualifications a Ross service coordinator should have. And so if you haven't hired your Ross service coordinator yet, I would refer to this to make sure that you're meeting the standards of the NOFA. We've also eliminated the 3rd funding category. This used to be a category for people who had an existing grant, so say from the year before, and wanted to serve additional properties. We just really never had enough money to go that far. Sometimes we did, but very, very few. So we've eliminated that. Also, just in terms of the mechanics of applying, there's no fax cover sheet anymore. So all of your supporting documents have to be attached. And if you are notified once you've submitted your application if you're notified by HUD that you have a curable deficiency, that means like a small mistake that can be corrected, you will, those deficiencies, the responses to the deficiencies have to be sent to this email address, applicationsupport@hud.gov. And you can read more about that in the general section on page 18. We've also significantly changed the 52768, which is the ROS funding request, the portion that asks about the type of applicant that you are. In particular, this really deals more with the resident associations. So now I want to turn to another big change, and I can't stress this enough. This is really big because we are now asking applicants to submit a salary and fringe comparability information with their application. In the past, we asked you to keep it on file. But the reason we've asked for it to be submitted is because we noticed a trend in applications for the maximum amount of salary. And last year we required salary comparability information for the first time to be submitted, and we found that the requests for maximum amounts had declined. So that was good. And what this does is it allows for HUD to make more awards. That's our goal here. So we will consider a salary request to be comparable if it doesn't exceed the average of the 3 salaries that you submit for comparability purposes by 10%. So see page 29 and 30 of the NOFA for more specific information. So what do we ask for in this salary comparability information? It has to be from 3 local employers, and one of them can be the applicant itself. So if you have a ROS service coordinator, you can use the salary and fringe that you pay that person, or any other comparable position, a caseworker, social worker, that you may have on staff. So one of them can be from you. The other 2 must be from other local employers, or, as I'll show you in another slide, if you live in a rural area, you can use information from a nearby metropolitan area. So yeah, this is what I was just alluding to. So if you live in a very rural area, and let's say you're the only employer with a ROS service coordinator, you may include information from a nearby metropolitan area. And the NOFA goes into more specifics about what your comps must submit, like it has to be on letterhead, there has to be a date, etc. We really also want to see a chart, and this is what it looks like. So the slide couldn't accommodate all of the contact information, so you'll see here I've just put telephone number and email, but we want the actual telephone number and email for 3 employers, and as I said, including you. You can be one of them. So make sure to put in the annual salary, the fringe, and the total. And please make sure that you complete this. If it's not complete, this is considered a curable deficiency because it's a new requirement. We wanted to help applicants and not be too strict, frankly. So if it is missing, we will ask you for it. But if you don't have it, we won't be able to make a salary determination. So let me turn to a few important items. So the first one is referring to RAD. The NOFA specifies that PHAs may not apply to serve units that have been approved for RAD conversion or have already converted. Also, PHAs that are submitting RAD applications for some or all of their units but that have not received approval will have to withdraw their request for a ROS grant as soon as they receive a RAD commitment to enter into a housing assistance payment. So please, if you know that your housing authority is contemplating or has submitted a RAD application, really think twice about whether you're going to submit a ROS application. So this year, last year as well, we specified that in any NOFA round, we would only fund up to 3 service coordinators for any PHA or tribal community. This point wasn't clear in past years. So if you know that there are other applicants, like maybe you're the housing authority and the resident association is going to apply, make sure you coordinate your applications. So let me go through the number of applications that different types of applicants may submit. So if you're a PHA, tribe, or TDHE, you can only submit 1. for either the new category or the renewal category. If you're a site-based resident association, you can only submit one. And there are we will fund 3 maximum per PHA. If you're a nonprofit, up to 3 for the new and or renewal categories, and you can serve 3 separate PHAs. Each application would have to be for a separate PHA or tribe or resident association. And the next slide gets a little bit dense. But if you're a non-site-based resident association, a citywide intermediary, et cetera, and you're applying under the 25% set aside, you can only submit 1 application under the new or renewal category. If you're a non-site-based resident association and you do not want to avail yourself of the 25% set aside, then you can submit up to 3 applications. But you have to have, remember your nonprofit status. And all resident associations must submit a contract administrator partnership agreement. We'll talk more about that later. So now let's turn to the number of positions. PHAs, it's all really for PHAs, tribes, and 501c3s applying on their behalf can apply for the number of positions depending on the number of public housing or NAHASDA assisted units that are in the portfolio of the PHA or tribe. And remember that each service coordinator must serve at least 50 units every year. So site-based resident associations can apply for 1 service coordinator for the project that they represent. If a particular resident association doesn't represent 50 units, they can join with another resident association to make up those 50 units and submit a joint application. You can go to page 19 for more information. And like I said before, only 3 site-based RAs from any 1 PHA may be funded, and that's for the new and or renewal. You can see the pages that I reference here, and also the appendix has a chart, which is, I hope, helpful. So RAs with 501c3 status, like I said before, if you're availing yourself of the 25% set aside, you can only apply for 1. If you're not putting yourself in the 25% set aside, you can apply for up to 9 service coordinators for 3 different PHAs. And remember the requirement for the CAPA. Nonprofits that are like a Goodwill, for example, I go back to that because that's easy. They can apply for 1 service coordinator per supporting resident association, or up to 3 per PHA tribe if the number of units supports that maximum. They can submit, like I said, 3 applications for a max total of 9 positions. But remember, all nonprofits in this category have to receive and submit a letter of support. And this is a threshold item, which means that if you don't submit it, it cannot be requested as part of a deficiency. So again, I want to remind you about the 3 service coordinator limit. We will fund a maximum of 3 raw service coordinator positions to a PHA tribe. So as I was mentioning earlier, if a PHA has 3 site-based resident associations that apply and the PHA is eligible for and applies for 3 positions as well, only 3 of them will be funded. So please coordinate your applications. So again, the lottery comes in here too. So if more than 1 application for the same project is received, the first to be chosen from the lottery will be awarded. And I'll talk a little bit more about coordination on the next slide. So we expect that grantees that have ROS, FSS, other types of grants like choice that provide funding for service coordination, that you work together with the staff in those programs to make sure that there's as little overlap between the programs as possible, so the dollars can go as far as they can, and you're leveraging your programs effectively. Another point on this is a note on services and fairs. If you have a health fair or a job fair, you can invite residents across your housing programs, even those who are non-assisted, and even the larger community if you wanted to. The only restrictions are on the people that you count as part of those that are being service coordinated through the ROS program. And the same thing would be true for classes. If you have any extra spaces, you can advertise that more widely. So the the eligible participants are residents of conventional public housing or NAHASDA assisted housing. Section 8 residents, unfortunately, are not eligible to be served by this grant. So we ask that you tell us who you're going to serve and which type of population, families and or elderly disabled. And you will use HUD form, the program form 52768 to designate which populations you're going to be serving. And a word about the Elderly Disabled Service Coordinator Program, EDSC. This is a line item from the operating fund. If you are a recipient of this program, you should only apply to serve families or you risk losing your EDSC funding. There's a question on this on the 52768, question 7, that should serve as a reminder to those in this particular category. There's more information on this slide. If you're an EDSC recipient, you can apply to serve families through the Ross program, and it will not impact your EDSC funding. And again, I just want to remind you, if you apply to serve, if you're an EDSC recipient and you apply to serve elderly or disabled residents, you could risk losing your EDSC funding permanently. So really, please pay close attention to this. So let me turn now to information that's relevant to renewal applicants. Since your last application, you can apply to serve the same projects, entirely different projects, or a mix thereof. You can change your budget, the number of service coordinators you're applying for, the population that you want to serve, your logic model goals, etc. So if the number of ACC or NAHASDA units has changed, you may be eligible for more service coordinator positions or less, depending on your unit count. And I want to remind you also that renewal PHA and RA applicants may not also submit applications under the new category. So this is information for resident associations. By statute, as I said, 25% of our funds must go to qualified resident associations. All RAs, or resident associations, should indicate their RA status on the first page of the form 52768. Site-based resident associations funded in 2013 can only apply to renew their 2013 grant. Site-based resident associations with older grants or no prior grants at all can apply for new funding, which would also be part of the 25% set-aside. Site-based resident associations with grants from 2014 or 2015 are not eligible to apply. And remember, you're eligible, if you're in this category, for one service coordinator. So the funding structure, let me talk about this for a little bit. So the salary that we will fund is up to $70,000 per year in salary and fringe. So please, like I said before, don't ask for the maximum if comparable professions in your local area do not support the salary. Remember to submit your salary comparability information to justify your salary request. And that comparability information should also include the fringe information as well. We also will fund $10,000 each year for administrative expenses and $2,000 each year for training and travel of the service coordinator. And I want to remind you also that when you apply for your salary and benefits, you'll use the 52768, but build in increases over time so that you can give salary increases in the second year and the third year for the service coordinator. Okay, so let's turn to the next slide. We fund on a 3-year basis, so the total amount you'll receive would be, the max could be $246 for one service coordinator or $738,000 for 3 service coordinators, but the minimum will vary, and that minimum will depend on what you ask for salary and whether you ask for the full amount for the admin and the training. I also wanted to say that you can propose a part-time coordinator at a lesser salary, but that person would still have to serve the minimum number of units every year. And again, please do not request the maximum if your salary comps do not support it. We've been in the position of having to recapture money from grantees because they didn't use the entire salary amount that they requested because they requested too much. And that money could have gone to another applicant and funded another community. So it's really important to stay within the comparables of your local area. So let me turn now to eligible activities. So the service coordinator is responsible really for coordinating programs with local service providers that match the needs of the residents that he or she is serving. I won't go through this whole list, but basically they're responsible for marketing the program, coordinating and sponsoring educational events, assisting in creating a resident group, facilitating self-help groups. This is just a guide. There's many, many activities that a service coordinator could offer without necessarily providing a direct service. So for administrative costs, we get lots of questions about this. This list isn't exhaustive, but remember, the goal of this is to support the work of the service coordinator and to make the ROS program as successful as it can be. So use that as sort of your litmus test. Is this admin expense going to go for the ROS program, or is it going to be used by other PHA programs? If that's the case, then it would not be eligible. So the admin funds really need to only be used for ROS. And you can see the list here. One I'd like to point out in particular is that we allow hardware and or software purchases to be made with admin funds that would support ROS participants' educational, financial, and other professional development. So we know that in today's 21st century economy, residents really need to have 21st century computer skills. So that's why we've allowed that those expenses to come out of the admin funds. But again, please request only what you think you need. So for training and travel, we fund $2,000 per service coordinator per year. And I've underlined this because it's really important. This training and travel is only for the ROS service coordinator position. It's not for the residents. Training should be relevant and necessary. And I also want to remind you that you need to go to your field office grant administrator to request approval for any training and travel prior to incurring those costs. So let me turn now to ineligible activities. So I've said direct services are not eligible. The salary of an FSS coordinator is not eligible. Costs associated with preparing your application are not eligible. So I won't go through all of it, but just again, work and expenses that do not fit within the scope and the intent of this program are not, excuse me, are not eligible. So the list that I have here is not exhaustive, but use that as your guide. So now let's turn to assembling your application. So there are standard and general forms that come with your application. And I'll talk more about some of them later, but I don't want to spend a lot of time going through each and every one of these. So I'd rather spend more time on the program forms. So the 52753 is a certification of election of resident council board. I'll talk more about that. The 52755 is the sample contract administrator partnership agreement. All resident associations need to have that, and anybody who's troubled, I'll talk a little bit more about that. The forms that I have an asterisk by means that they cannot be requested as part of a deficiency. So if they are not included in your application, your application will not be considered complete, and you will just not be funded, unfortunately. So make sure you have all of these forms with your application. So let's sort of dig in a little bit more. All applicants must show that they have a high quality program. This is a threshold. So on the HUD 52769, you're going to show us that you have at least 10 needs. So we have a variety of needs already filled in. You just check off the ones that are applicable to you, and you have to show us that you have at least 10. We have rejected applications because they've only showed 9, and that's really unfortunate. So this is a threshold, and then of those 10, you have to show that 50% have partners in place. So if you said that you had 12 needs, you would have to show that 6 of them have partners in place that can help you meet the residents' needs. So if you're also going to use this form to show match, and I'll talk more about that. So if you are proposing to be, if you are a PHA, for example, and you're proposing to contribute to some of the match, you have to indicate your source of funding. And every provider that you use doesn't necessarily have to commit to the match, but they certainly could. And match is another threshold, which we will talk about. So you can list more than one service provider for a particular need. And as I said before, at least 10 needs must be identified, and 50% of all the needs should have at least one service provider to meet that need. If you, the applicant, are the service provider, you must list the source of funding for 3 years. So now let's turn to the 52769. The beauty of this form is that it serves two purposes. It shows you, what your needs are, and it allows you to calculate your match, which is another threshold. So, but the value of your match is documented in match letters, which you have to keep on file. So each partner contributing to the match is indicated on the HUD 52769. The form must be signed by the executive director, board president, whoever is responsible for the organization that is submitting the application. A match can be for cash or in kind, and can be for services provided to participants in this program or for other eligible activities. So match cannot be for something that is ineligible. So let me give you a snapshot of the form. So you'll see here on the left-hand side that there's a list of pre-filled out possible needs that you might have. So all you need to do is check the ones that are relevant to you, list the service providers who will be fulfilling the needs in those different categories that you've checked, and then you can't really see it, but the next column shows the match that various partners will be contributing. So on this snapshot, this is the bottom of the page, your total at the very bottom, there's two totals. One at the end of all of those columns, that'll be the total match that you're saying you have and that you want to have documented in your match letters. And then we ask you for the total grant that you're requesting, again, the total match that you're documenting. The reason we do this is to remind you that you have to calculate the 25%. So you don't miss that. If you don't have 25%, you've missed this threshold and you will not be funded. So let me go a little bit through what we ask to see in the match letters. They have to show the total value of the commitment that's being made by your partner. They have to show how the value of the commitment was calculated. So here I have an example. I won't talk about it now, but you can go back to this. It's also in the NOFA. The match has to be available at time of award, and they must be kept on file. So I want to stress this point. HUD can request to see these letters at any time, including at the time of award. So make sure you have these letters, because if you don't, you could risk losing your grant. So now let's turn to the Ross budget form, the 52768. This will tell us what type of applicant you are, the name and project number of the projects you want to serve, the population you will serve. It will ask about the EDSC question, the number of coordinators you want to hire, the amount of money you are requesting for salaries, admin, and training. The total grant request is at the bottom of this form should be the same as what's on the 52769 and the SF424. And what I'd like to tell you about this, here's a snapshot, is we haven't broken down salary and fringe into two columns. We've put it all into one. So you can see in this example that the salary goes up over the course of the 3 years for each service coordinator that's being requested in this example. So you can do that. So the HUD 52768 continued. For EDSC, this is question 7, and this is what it'll ask you. Are you currently eligible to receive funding for this program? Again, if yes, we've had problems with this in the past where applicants have proposed to serve elderly disabled populations, and have EDSC, and so there's been a bit of an issue there. So please make sure that this issue is clear before you submit your application. And this is new also on the 52768. We didn't ask this as clearly in the past. So question 11 asks, do you, the applicant, have a current Ross Service Coordinator grant? In other words, a grant from 2014 or 2015. All renewals, you should check no. And if you answer yes to question 11, are you applying to serve only projects that are not served by your current Ross SC grant? Renewal applicants should check no for this, and new applicants can leave this blank because presumably they would have said no to question 11. So now let's talk about the capacity and past performance of applicants. All applicants have to show this. It's a little bit different for renewals than it is for new applicants, and I'll talk about the difference. So a past performance capacity narrative of no more than 10 pages is required for new applicants. Please read the NOFA carefully for more specifics about this requirement. The narrative is not required for renewal applicants unless they are FOS troubled or have been notified of performance problems by the field office. So check now with your field office or area ONAP to see if this is going to be a problem. And although it's not a threshold, capacity and past performance is assessed by the field office or area ONAP on a pass-fail basis. So for renewal applicants, we're going to look at the number of units served to ensure that you met the required 50-unit minimum every year. And we'll look to see whether or not you've achieved at least 50% of your goals that were contained in the 2013 logic model. We'll also look at the timeliness of your drawdowns. Did they occur on a regular basis or did they not? And we will also look at the timeliness of reporting. So your field office grant administrator is going to be doing this analysis. If you fail 2 of these, your application will not be funded. So the next slide is for renewal applicants that are troubled or have performance deficiencies. A narrative must be submitted addressing your contract administrator's recent, relevant, and successful experience. You have to have a signed contract administrator partnership agreement with your application. And just a word about who they can be. A contract administrator may be a nonprofit, another PHA, an educational institution, etc. Remember that past performance is a program requirement and evaluated on a pass-fail basis. And missing a narrative and/or the CAPA will disqualify you. So now let's turn to what's required of new applicants. So they definitely have to submit a narrative, and it's similar in the content of what I just said, but you have to cover your capacity. What is your experience? How recent is it? How relevant is the experience that you have, and how successful has it been? We'll also ask about program administration and fiscal management. There's a list of 5 criteria to be addressed by your narrative, and make it really clear. Just address them point by point so they're easy for the reviewer to analyze. If new applicants are considered troubled PHAs and all resident associations and any nonprofit applying as resident associations are required to have a contract administrator. So these applicants should discuss both their own and their contract administrator's capacity in the narrative. If a new applicant has had previous HUD awards, the review will also take into account information in HUD's records about your performance. Again, the past performance review is a program requirement and will be conducted on a pass-fail basis. So now let me turn to the logic model. This is where you tell us what your goals are for what you want to achieve during the course of your grant. The logic model has been changed significantly since 2013. I hope it's simpler and easier for you to use. Please, I really ask you to please read the instructions contained in the first 3 tabs. Instructions, the drop-down guidance, and the How to Count tab. The How to Count tab is really important. It'll provide uniform guidance across all of our grantees on how to count participants for each metric. And this will make sure that the data that we get from you is reliable, that we're counting everything in the same way. I don't like to say this, but the Government Accountability Office dinged us because we did not have good data, and so we made a real effort to streamline the logic model and provide very specific guidance so that we would be comparing apples to apples. So for those of you who remember the logic model of FY13, there are no policy priorities that will set you apart from other applicants if you were to choose them. So everybody's on the same footing since nobody can select them. So let me show you what the logic model looks like. So you see here, it might be hard for you, but there are 3 tabs. Those are the tabs that I asked you to read carefully before you start filling out your logic model. So there's 3 instruction tabs. Then you get to the cover sheet. So fill this out first before you start filling out your goals, because it'll fill out other parts of the other the tabs, the other year tabs, which I'll talk about next. So on each year tab, there are 14 mandatory metrics. So everybody is going to have to fill these out. Some mandatory metrics are for activities related to families. Others are for elderly disabled populations. If a mandatory metric is not relevant to your program, just enter a 0 in the projection column, which is shaded in orange. I'll show you in the next slide. For both services and activities and outcomes. So you would put a 0 if it's not applicable to you. Do not complete the annual column, which is shaded in blue or gray. This is what you'll submit a year from when you started your grant. So you'll be able to tell us what you actually achieved and compare it to what your goal was. So here you can see what I was talking about. You see the orange columns, that's the projection. And that's where you would put in your numerical goals for both the services and your outcomes. Okay, mandatory metrics are pre-populated for all 3 years, so that means there's no drop down. You just fill in the numbers for the metrics that apply to you. Numericals have to be inputted for every year. Below the mandatory metrics are optional metrics. So we put those in to allow you to further tell us what you'd like to do, but they're limited as well. I think there's about 14 of those too. So the optional ones will allow you to tell us more about your program, and these are available from a drop-down list. Once you select an optional metric, it will automatically populate in all 3 years, and the totals tab. So that's another thing, is the totals tab tabulates everything automatically for you, so you don't have to go back and add everything together and fill in the totals tab. So hopefully that'll make your life easier. So here you can see, hopefully, there's a fine light blue line that divides the mandatory metrics from the optional metrics. And here again, you can see where there's year 2 and year 3 tabs. Some of the optional metrics here on year 2 that were selected, say, in year 1 may not be relevant in year 2. They'll still appear, so here you would just put a 0. And here again, here's the totals tab. You can see that the numbers have tabulated from the prior 3 years, so everything's added up automatically for you. So let me just go to tell you where you can find it. It's in the instructions download, and I'll talk about this in a second. It's an Excel file. Please do not make it a PDF. Remember to complete all the mandatory metrics for year 1, 2, and 3. If that's all you do, that's great. We definitely want those mandatory metrics completed. Optional metrics, like I said, they come after the mandatory metrics. Complete only the ones that are relevant to you. They'll carry across all 3 years, and the totals tab is automatically populated. So as I said, the needs have been pre-selected in column 2. Well, I didn't say this actually. The needs have been pre-selected in column 2, so there's nothing you have to do in column 2. And also the activities and services and outcomes do not have to be one-to-one. So if you're doing one service, or say 2 services, both of those services can lead to just one outcome, for example. But there's a lot of information about that in the instructions tab, so spend time, please, looking at that. So when do you submit your logic model? After your application. It is an annual report. It's pretty much been that way since the renewals. They're due 30 days after the anniversary of your grant execution. The final one is due 90 days after your after your grant has ended. And remember, the standard form 425, which is a financial form, is also due with each logic model submission. So I'm going to turn to other things that are required for your application. So the 52753 is a certification of Resident Council Board of Election. This is required for each resident association applicant and for any nonprofit, any 501c3 that is applying to serve an RA. And one is needed for each of the RAs that a nonprofit is applying to serve. So letters of support. This is really important. It's a threshold requirement for nonprofit applicants that are applying to serve a PHA or a tribe or a resident association. A missing letter or any information in it cannot be corrected later. So make sure to really read the NOFA. These are the requirements that are in the NOFA, but remember what I said, the NOFA is your Bible, so go back to that. The contract administrator partnership agreement is also required if it's applicable. So it's for all FOS troubled PHAs and all resident association applicants. It's not required for regular nonprofit applicants. It's not required for non-troubled PHAs. It's also found in the instructions download. If you are FOS troubled in any area, I want to stress this, by the deadline date for this NOFA, you must have a CAPA, even if you will not be troubled soon. So you won't be funded without it. That's really important. So for 501c3 nonprofits, you have to submit your IRS determination letter to prove your nonprofit status and your 2015 annual information return that you send in to the IRS. This is new this year, so just want to highlight that. And resident associations that have either 501c3 status or locally incorporated will have to submit comparable documentation, as I've indicated here. So let me turn to the lottery. So applicants who pass all the threshold and program requirements and eligibility requirements will be entered into the lottery that corresponds to their applicant type. So residents will be placed in the 25% set aside. If we get more resident associations that are qualified and eligible to be funded than the 25% will fund, we'll move them into the next lottery that is relevant for them. So then after that, after we fund the resident associations, then we fund renewal applicants. If funding remains, which it has, then we will go to lottery number 2, which is new other applicants. So I'm just going to delve into this a little bit deeper. So if a lottery is held for the 25% set aside, the RA applicants that are not selected will be placed in the appropriate renewal or new category. And if more than 3 RA applicants are received from the same PHA that are deemed eligible for the lottery, the first 3 chosen will be funded. So lottery 2 is for renewal applicants, and so that comes after the RA set aside. Qualified applicants with FY16 Ross grants will be funded through a lottery, and it's a blind lottery, so we never know who's going to be awarded. And then new other applicants, once we fulfill lottery number 2, we move down to the new applicants and we fund those. So let me turn to where you get your grant application. You have to go to Grants.gov, to the home page. The quickest way to find the application is to search by the CFDA number, which is the number I mentioned at the very beginning, 14.870. And then it'll come up and you'll see that URL there. So this is sort of the package tab, I guess. Or sorry, the next one is the package tab. So there you'll click on the tab that says package. And once you click on that, you'll get to this page and you'll click on this other URL. And once you click there, you'll get to this page. And it'll ask you to include an email address. It's optional, but I suggest you do it. If there's a change that happens to the NOFA or to the package or some date change, for example, you'll be notified through Grants.gov. And if you don't put your email in, you may not be notified. You probably won't be notified. Then you get to where the actual application is. And I want to stress that there's two parts to it. There's the application instructions and the application package. So both of those links comprise the entire application. I also wanted to show you this other link here, which is the Grants.gov Workspace. There's a tutorial on how to use it on Grants.gov. It's a shared online environment where members of the same organization can simultaneously access and edit different forms within an application. You would still need to upload your documents to Grants.gov when you're ready to submit your application, but this could be an effective way of preparing your application if you have multiple people working on it. But please go to the tutorials that will walk you through the mechanics of how to use Workspace. You can also do it the old-fashioned way, which is downloading the application instructions, which are in a zip file. And here are all of the ROS program forms. So the way I like to think about it is application instructions means the ROS program forms, the forms that are specific to the ROS program. You can create a folder where you save all of these files, and you could name it FY16 ROS Instructions Download, so you will find it easily. Then when you open up the application package page, you'll get this. This is what it'll look like. It's a little misleading in that it says mandatory and optional forms. Some optional forms are actually mandatory. So I'm not really sure why they do it this way, but for example, the attachments would be mandatory because you have to attach other forms, and that's the form you use to attach other documents. So now I'm going to turn to registering with Grants.gov and all the steps that it takes. So bear with me, it's a little dense, but I feel like it's important because every year we have problems, and we don't always get to solve them, unfortunately. But so if you've never registered before, start now, please, because it can take a while. The first step is to obtain a data universal numbering system, or a DUNS number. That is free, and actually anything to register to apply for a federal grant is free. If you come across a website that charges you money, it's not a legitimate federal website. Then once you do that, you go to SAM.gov to designate your e-business point of contact. This is somebody who will be able to authorize someone else to submit your application. So when creating or updating your profile at SAM.gov, identify the e-business point of contact, and that person will create a 9-digit marketing partner ID number. So this number is mandatory for SAM registrants and contains 9 characters. There are tutorials on Grants.gov. I mentioned them at the very beginning, so please spend time looking at them. There are more steps that I'm going to go through in the next slide. So the person who's actually going to be submitting the application through Grants.gov is called the Authorized Organization Representative, or the AOR. The AOR must register with Grants.gov using the organization's DUNS number. When the AOR registers with Grants.gov, the e-business point of contact receives an email. The e-business point of contact must then log into Grants.gov using DUNS and the MPIN to confirm that the AOR is authorized to submit an application on behalf of the organization. The AOR will receive an email from Grants.gov informing them when they've been approved. An organization may have more than one AOR. And we also recommend that everyone involved in this grants process should add at Grants.gov, at SAM.gov, and at FSD.gov to their safe senders list in their email program, so you don't miss a critical email from any of these organizations. So like I said, if you haven't registered, begin now. If you are registered, check to make sure that everything is up to date and will be up to date by the deadline date of this NOFA. If your AOR has left, follow the registration steps 4 through 6 in the previous slide. And like I said before, incomplete registration has been a common error and resulted in applicants not getting funded because they couldn't submit their application. Please, if you have any questions about this, go to the tutorials that are available on Grants.gov. You can go there easily by clicking on the Applicants tab. So another word about SAM, it expires every year. You should get notifications 60, 30, and 15 days prior to the expiration of your SAM registration. If you have problems with SAM, you can call their Federal Service desk at the number that I have there. Again, there is no fee to register or renew. One other point I'd like to make is that if your e-business point of contact has changed, make sure that the new e-business point of contact has also granted permission to the person submitting the application, who would be the AOR. So that's also an important point. Let me show you what sam.gov looks like. This is the official website. In past years, there was an organization that was, I guess, pretending to be sam.gov, and it looked like this. I don't know if it's still up there, but just to let you know, they were requesting funds too, so that's also a telltale sign that it's not a legitimate website. So this is how to find me if you have questions. This is my email address and my phone number. I try to respond as quickly as I can. If you have a specific question, try to leave it on my voicemail if I'm not there, so I can leave you a specific answer if you're not there. My backup is my supervisor, Ronald T. Ashford at HUD.gov. You can see his email and his phone number. At the end of these slides, I have additional tips for you that I don't want to go through because it'll involve more time than I have. But I'd like to wish you all good luck. Thank you for participating, and we really look forward to seeing your applications. Thank you.